today I know that most of us are designers. I wanted to speak a little bit about what is design, right? Where does this word come from? Design is the old know comes from Latin. We all know what sign means. Sign is your signature, right? Your mark. But what does e-sign mean? So D in Latin was to come out, to express, to complete. So to complete this sort of signature. So we are responsible for the architecture of the plant. And we all know that we can do better. It's very challenging to do this, especially when the program is 5,000 units, 2,000 units. I come from a family of architecture. So it was my grandfather was an architect, my father was an architect, and then now I'm 60-year-old. He's 60 already, and 40 years of architecture went by. And like, okay, so I'm supposed to get some sort of thoughts, right, to you guys. So I'm like, okay, well, let's start with what is design and how come design became for interiors, for architecture, for city, urban design, landscape design. It's everywhere. So in a nutshell, design also means to draw, right? To diseñar in Italian or to dessin in French. So we all know that it all starts with drawing. And now we have all these tools, all these animals, rhino, grasshopper, you name it. And sometimes they feel that we are forgetting the first step. The first step is the dream, let's call it the vision. And a dream that has no structure. Dreams are infinite and have no structure. But to build has a lot of structure and it has a lot of limits. So how do we go from dreaming to building? And that is, I think, that in a way, what we have to do. And we're already caught up in all this types of modern, post-modern, deconstructivist, and we're suffering though. I was in Honorary school back in the days in 1990, a few years ago, and all my teachers were deconstructivists. And I was postmodernist. So I suffered a lot, and my buildings at that point looked kind of weird. Sometimes they started modern, then they went deconstructivist, and then they went postmodern. So I encourage everybody in a way to break away from these ideologies. Already politics, we can see ideology is a limiting factor. But when you come to design and you come to architecture, I think it's important to break away. I'm not a modern architect. I'm not, a brutalist. I'm not a Renaissance. I am, trying to solve a problem through the tools that I have. The tools that I have are this one, and then trying to coordinate a group of people that are all very, very talented, probably. I feel really honored to be amongst, I was listening to the people that are here. I'm very honored to be with this crowd of great designers. This is where we start all the time. It's like, okay, how many variations of a cube can I do? With maybe 50, right? But it all comes from the hand. And I think this is an important thing. This is a project that we did where we knew we had a cube, but the whole city was made out of cubes. It's in China. And so can you do like all the possible breaks and variations? And can we have all the styles in one page? And then where do we go from here? From here we go to a construction project, right? With what we do a lot is build. We love to build. We love to really get things going in terms of finishing projects. So a lot of architects that come to India, they come in for a concept and then they fly out. With all my clients in India, I do a concept, then we do schematic, then we do design development with the Indian architect, and then we do construction drawings, and then we actually build the thing, and it's a lot of fun. But what is the formula? I was talking about design, design to sign out, to sign, and through this sign, a construction of signatures would be a project in a way. So first, we need to dream, right? In English, dream comes from the word joy. So we need to dream and be happy. But then how do we transform it into something that actually has structure, has all those things called mechanical things, all that stuff? And what is the methodology that we are using? And finally, should we leave a legacy? Is this legacy important? Because I know some people are too hung up on the legacy, and maybe it's the process that matters. So we started here back in the 70s with my father. It was all about modular architecture. This is a resi project, believe it or not. And those are the units that can create patios, can create facades. I will show you more about this. But it all starts with a module. It all starts with a dream, but a dream in a way that has to be modular. So dream first and then try to design in a way that you can actually get some stuff built. This project, the W Barcelona, which is the tower that you have back there, was also a dream in the sense that when I went to the site, it was water. It's like, where's the site? Okay, no, where is it? The site was actually the water. We had to infill the water and then what to do on top of the water. So doesn't look too rigid. So we're thinking about a sail, thinking about the movement of the water, trying to create a curve. And that was a little bit what happened here in this project. That it's a very commercial project, but there was a dream at the beginning. You can see how the project actually is resting on the water. It's only 100 meters high, this building, but it looks a little higher. We've also done airports, like this airport here in Barcelona. Now you come to the airports of the world, and this was only done 50 years ago. It looks like, it needs a refit already. But it's a 1 million square meter building on the sand. So again, a dream of building on the sand, on the water. It's all about foundations. I'm not going to talk about foundations now, but it's also very interesting how you can make a building float on the water, float on the sand. So it's like a building which is like a boat in itself. Um, Coming back to dreams in India, this was done in Gurgaon back 10 years ago. The dream is here, and then the reality was not so different, um, or a little bit different. But trying hard to make even a resi project feel like a little bit of a dream. You can see here we're trying to cut through the slabs so that the lobbies and the clubs are connected to the sky. There's a lot of things that you learned here in your wonderful country. Is like how within those limits, within those laws that you have, how to break the laws to create spatial continuities, like here. How to make gardens which are in basement number one, right? Or even basement number two. I don't recommend basement number two because then the plants don't grow, right? So, but anyway, some of the developers in India are very, very imaginative and let it dream. We come from a firm that tries to dream but also tries to build buildings in the important cities like Chicago. This was an office building done for a developer over there, but it was all about trying to give it a little bit of rhythm with horizontals and verticals, a little bit of a cornice on the top, and then make a building which is standing proudly over there in the middle of the city that invented the skyscraper and the elevator, as you all know. So Chicago is a place where you learn forever what office buildings are all about. And you can see we're honored here to be by Mies van der Rohe and by Calder. So a lot of responsibility because we have the most modern guy on the right here, Mies, and then we're trying to do what has been labeled as postmodern, which, just words, right? I mean, what is modern? It just helps us kind of understand what we're doing and explain it. We'll be working at Cordelia in like Noida, trying to do office buildings also that have a theatrical component, that even if it's a gas box where there's a sense that there's a cornice on top, a sense that there's a sort of like a gate, a sense that there's a base, and yet it's just glass, right? And what we call the shadow box, which is like 7 centimeters. It's a type of panel, right? But even with a building which is very efficient, very cost oriented, very functional, there's a way to dream that the cities don't have to be just mechanical and machine. The whole thing about modern, it was the machine is the dream, and postmodern was the dream is the human being. So spaces not for machines or inspired in machine, but spaces for human beings by human beings. And then you get a lot of criticism from a lot of people, but that's fine. So for example, here we have a building that was already sort of had to have this shape. So how to make it a little bit more vertical because it looks like a square. A company says that's a potato or something, but no, how to make it vertical? How to try to do something which has a little bit of a spirit. Sometimes we talk about the soul of buildings, and it's important to try to understand the soul of the land, the place where you are, the soul of the place, the culture, the winds, the temperature, and then try to make a building that somehow follows that formula or those ideas. Because I've been doing that for Google back in 10, 15 years ago. Here what we try to do is, okay, why again a glass box for an office building? Why don't we use a beautiful stone of India, same one that was used by Latches in the parliament. But how can we use it again? So it finally worked out. Then we're doing a lot of housing projects because at the end, the bread and butter of architecture, I mean, 80% of what we do is residential. The world, 80% is residential. And within residential, we have the EWS, the economic weaker sections of society. And also we have social housing. And also we have to do housing for everybody, which is decent, which is good, and which also has that idea of urban space. Here you can see a little bit of how even with blocks you can provide a facade, and even with blocks which are done with industrial systems like Mivan and all those shuttering systems that we'll be using in India, how you can paint it in a way that also provides a little bit of an envelope. Okay, here, this is a building in Calcutta. I love Calcutta. We just came back with my co-founder. This building is now under construction, almost finished. And what a pleasure it is to see in a city like Calcutta that actually there's so much love for development, and it's great. So some of the buildings that we're doing with Brigade in South India and Bangalore, a lot of density. I was thinking, well, so much density. But there's the density is scarce, especially well, the country we have density, we need to do it. So how to do the block, and sort of how to break away from the block. This is a project called Eldorado. It's 6,000 units. Then we've done buildings which are landmarks, like this one is the Shiseido company, a green company in Japan. Always trying to see how we can understand the local culture. It's not that Japan is red and that's it, or minimalism. At least from our point of view, trying to provide something which sits well with the DNA of the local culture. And methodology, really quickly, because I'm running out of time. Methodology for us is hand drawing. So we can do perspectives, we can do plans, we can do master plans, we can do everything with the hand. And from the hand, this is how we're starting. Then we go to the grasshoppers, the rhinos, the cats. But if I have to say something to say that was worth it, is that it has really helped us a lot to continue drawing with the hand. It really is very, very different. And it's much faster. The legacy is something that, do you want to leave a legacy, or does a legacy sort of happen anyway? My father, who passed away 3 years ago, on the left, be on the right, I learned everything from this guy. This is where we were working for 50 years. It's an old cement factory, which is transformed into our studio. So it's an industry which is transformed into a garden. So it's not just functional and efficient. It's beautiful in a way. So some of the crazy projects that we built, like Muralla Roja, which is just done with a brick and stucco, and that's it. We didn't have much more. But we had the imagination to try to combine colors, pinks that are always very, very difficult in architecture, very, very difficult, and to try to do something which is imaginative. But yeah, it's difficult to do this when efficiency is the only rule, right? So how to do this, that it works and sells, and that is part of some sort of legacy. This is 1 and 7. This is social housing, but social housing that is moving. You can see those patios, the ventilation patios. Of course, here we have a lot of patios, a lot of shafts. And in Spain too, we have very similar weather. In Spain, we have this kind of similar weather in here. And sometimes I think that the developers that introduced me to India were also thinking that. Some of the projects that I do, or that my team does, they're called like Sevilla, Granada, Toledo. They have Spanish names. So this Walden 7, it's a utopian project. These are the courtyards inside. The blues are refreshing and cooling, and it's in the suburbs of Barcelona. But this is the idea that even with modern architecture, you can do so modern regionalism or critical regional. We're trying to break away from the Corbusian block here. The block's very, very boring, but this is done with modules, and it creates windows towards the landscape, spaces inside. And again, this idea of the module, where I started at the beginning, I showed that slide. These are the modules that created this one, which is also very cubistic, very cubist, I would say. Very inexpensive to build at the kind in Spain, done with this very industrial windows all of a sudden, and this very purple and blue architecture, which is always very difficult to do the flues. But here I think it works. It works well.
I think whatever you showed is actually, it resonates very deeply with the theme of the symposium, this year, which is the age of design syncretism. And it's an absolute honor, firstly, to be sitting across the stage with you, asking you these questions. So thank you. You've spoken about your work across the world, Africa, China, Saudi Arabia, and of course, India, right? You've been creating inclusive, livable spaces for all spectrums of society. They're aesthetically just fabulous, right? How is it to work in India? How does social, cultural context play a role in your work?
Well, I think I was born in India, but maybe not this guy, but some soul from the past because I really feel so comfortable here ever since I started. My first trip was to Rajasthan, of course, with my father when I was 15 to see the wonders of that part of India. But then immediately after, when I started my career, I was invited to Mumbai. And my first experience was, "What's your price?" I said, "It's 18 rupees." And they said, "You're out. It's 17 rupees. Out. Get out." I'm like, okay, it's very competitive over here. So I think it's tremendously interesting. I mean, now for me, India is like where I want to kind of finish my life as an architect. I really love it. We have a lot of calls from other places, but here I find that the bylaws are very free to do a lot of things. You go to China, for example, it's very, let's call it communist, let's call it what it is, or Russia, even Europe. And here there's a lot of flexibility. Within that flexibility, if you're not efficient and you don't have that 18% or 20%, then you're out. So it's a combination of imagination and structure, I would say, order.
So, your firm's work is obviously recognized for a distinct architectural language, the use of geometry in form, in plan, in color. The world has evolved technology, materials, AI, new ways of thinking. But there is an RB-ness, if I may use that word, that has remained very rooted in your work and in your practice. So balancing, utopian ideals with practical needs of how the world is shifting today, if you had to define a few values that define your process, your theoretical sort of approach to your architecture and your practice, what would that be?
Well, I think it all starts with the city, the cities of humanity. We're very much in love with cities, and a city is not a city is a city, right? And we all know what it is. And sometimes city becomes monster. So we're trying to keep cities at with certain urban design, certain values. Then within that, having said that, we try to put geometry into the exteriors of the city. So the exteriors are not just leftovers; they're also part of a geometry. You see that in Europe a lot, right? But you see it also in Asia and even in America. It all starts in a way with that Mediterranean idea of the plaza, the agora, the place where people come together, the market. So cities for us is the main thing. And then when you do a building, it should be related to the city. It shouldn't just be thrown in there like it's not a piece of art that you put in a museum. It's something that has to be within the city. And I mean, I could go on and on here about this, but in a nutshell, I would say it's that.
And that's exactly, I mean, that's really interesting because you could see that in the portfolio that you showed. And when we talk about cities and we talk about architecture, we obviously talk about the issue of scale, right? And your practice is challenging conventional boundaries of scale between architecture and sculpture. And you have from small boutique projects to large scale housing, like you spoke about. How does one balance the monumental scale with human intimacy? Because you're creating for people.
Absolutely. Very good question. I think that scale is one of the most difficult things in architecture. It's very, very difficult. You have a drawing like this, but you have 500 meters in 20 centimeters, right? So it's very, very difficult. It's like Mozart. He played music, it just came to him. And with architecture, scale is that. You have to get it. Even big buildings can have scale. The Eiffel Tower is a big building, it has scale. So, how to give scale to monumentality is a great question. I think if you can go back to the roots of composition, proportion, beauty, balance, if you can have that in mind, you're in the right track to get scalability, to have that human scale. You go into a space and you need to feel what's happening behind, and what's happening all around. So scale has to do with space making also. So the space are the nests of humanity in a way, right? In the way I see it. So it's a constant struggle. Scale is there's no magic formula.
And I'll also talk a little bit about color here because your work has that very distinct, color aesthetic. And how do you grapple with that?
Well, all that modern architecture, except some cases, were all gray and all no cement everywhere, black and white. Even in school, when I was in school, you use color and you're like some sort of, you know, color is a no-no. But we're coming from the Mediterranean, coming from Gaudi, coming from, North African architecture. There's always color is a tool that you shouldn't be afraid of. Color is part of the design process, and it's very, very, very good. Especially in India, you have a concrete wall of 150 meters with apartments, 50 levels of apartments. You have those shuttering systems which are flat. Then you have the grooves which are 1 centimeter, and then what else do you have? Color. So without color, sometimes you don't have anything.
Your practices work resonates strongly with contemporary culture, right? Film, photography. I mean, we were all just like in awe of the photography, right? And in today's sort of world and discourse around social media, Instagram, a lot of the work often becomes instructive for architects today. And I think this was a point that was discussed earlier as well. For a time when the world is also grappling with issues of sustainability, affordability, cities, your work addresses the issue of a city within a city. How do you address this contemporary culture? How do you find that balance between what you're doing in the practice and what is contemporary culture today?
That's a great question. I would say that we always fail to do an ideal project. It's always everything we do is a big failure in a way. So we have to really try to do those ideal projects where they're ecological, sustainable, they're inclusive, right? So we have all sectors of economic sectors of society. We started doing social housing only because that was it in Europe. If you wanted to do large scale, it had to be, and then all our sites were in the suburbs. So, and all the suburbs were done with blocks. So that's where like, okay, we don't want to do this. So how can we make a block that actually turns the corner or becomes a crescent? And how can we do that with technology, concrete technology, of course? Um, we're still trying to do the perfect project. We've never done it, even with this ideal cities, that Chinese project. That's the ideal city in the Renaissance. Also, Vasari, the ideal city. But because of the amount of people that are on planet Earth, it's not always possible to be idealistic. You have to constantly learn how to do density and an ideal project. It's very difficult.
So nice to hear that you spoke about the legacy part towards the end of your presentation. What are the challenges? What are the perks? Is there a struggle to negotiate that?
Between legacy and
Yeah.
legacy comes or doesn't come. You can't plan your legacy while you're alive. You feel that there's a little bit of legacy, but you shouldn't be hung up on legacy because then you become rigid and become, I don't want to say the word, but something bad, really bad. You know how architects are, oh, the legacy and this, and I'm going to be known for 500 years. Then you die, everybody forgets about you. So why don't you focus on the present, on really loving what you do in the present moment, and then those narratives, those wonderful speeches that I heard before, the narrative concept, which you haven't spoken about the narrative, but narrative is everything. I mean, I know now with marketing, so everything is stories. Even if you sell this water, there has to be a story from the Himalayas, and it's pure, and this and this story, and at the end, it gets a little boring. Now we have to invent something else after the stories. But it's very interesting when they, instead of giving you a program, the kitchen, the this, the lobby, they say, we give you a story. Oh man, this is great. I have a story. So I'm breaking away from functionality and from being kind of like a slave to functionality. Because look, we had 50 years of modern architecture or more. And what's the result? The result is very, very ugly buildings all over the place. So we're trying to add a little bit of something to that narrative of breaking away from functionality and creating poems or stories or something much more feminine and much more interesting, I think.
Thank you. That is so deep. Thank you. Can we please have a big round of applause?